Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours, the global travel company led by journalists. 4 more years, that's the cry from Donald Trump's rallies. It seems all but certain that the former president will run again. But in the meantime, he has a few legal hurdles to jump over. There could be federal indictments, developments at the state level, 6 possible cases in total. With us here to run through them, we have one of the United States' best-known investigative journalists and the author of several books. He is Michael Isikoff. Hello and welcome, Michael.
Good to be with you.
Thank you very much for joining us. I'm in Johannesburg. Where are you?
Washington, D.C.
Excellent. We're the best place to be monitoring this. Michael, there are a huge number of things going on. I guess the first place to start with is just as a general thought. Trump didn't have a very beneficial impact during the midterms, did he?
No, in fact, he was widely seen as a big loser, something he never likes to be seen as. But no question, many of the candidates he endorsed, and those endorsements were primarily because the candidates accepted his claims of election fraud and a stolen election in 2020. Pretty much, they lost across the board. His candidates for the Senate in Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz, in New Hampshire, Don Baldock, it fell short. Arizona, Blake Masters running for the Senate fell short. Carrie Lake, who had been very big on the whole election, stolen election theme, was seen as the favorite in the governor's race in Arizona. She lost as well. The much vaunted red wave never materialized, and the takeaway from most political pundits, including many Republicans, was that Donald Trump was an albatross for the party in these midterms.
I was struck. We were in Georgia and we met in Georgia too. And I remember we were at a Herschel Walker rally, and I met somebody who turned up at that rally just to see what was going on. And she had split her ticket. She wasn't voting for Herschel Warnock. She was voting for she wasn't
Raphael Warnock.
She was voting for Raphael Warnock and voting for Brian Kemp. So not in Brian Kemp too, though a Republican candidate, certainly not as a Trump-backed one too. So you saw definitely there people pulling back from it. So there
was a lot of that in Georgia in particular. I mean, Brian Kemp got 200,000 more votes as the Republican candidate for governor than Herschel Walker got running as the Republican candidate for the Senate. So that does not augur well for this runoff we have coming up in just a week and a half. In Georgia, the law is you have to get 50% in order to win a race, and Warnock fell slightly short of that, 49 point something 2%, I think it is. Walker was 47, but 2 points back from Warnock. But I think that the fact that it's now clear that the results of the control of the United States Senate will not rest on what the results of this race are. And I think the consensus is that helps Warnock over Walker, that if control of the Senate was at stake, the Republicans would be going all out, pouring unprecedented amounts of cash into the race. They're not going quite that far, although a lot of big Republicans are coming down to campaign for him. But I think right now Warnock probably has the edge, but we'll see soon enough.
I'm just terrible. In my rush to get here on time, I failed to turn the alarm off on my phone, so I'm going to have to turn that off in just a second. Just staying with that one thought, does that race, the fact that Trump, we know that Trump is going to, it seems inevitable that he's going to announce his candidacy for 2024.
Well, he has. He's announced.
Yeah, he has. He has.
Yes, he's running.
Of course he has. I'm sorry, I'm getting mad. Yeah,
right.
Of course he has.
Yeah.
Does that impact at all on the? Is that something that has any bearing at all?
Well, we'll see. I mean, if Walker loses, it will be one more instance of a Trump-backed candidate losing, and further reinforces a narrative that I think a lot of Republicans are starting to subscribe to, although not as many want to say it out loud. But privately, they will all tell you that Donald Trump has lost a lot of wind and is no longer the asset that they thought he was a few years ago. But that said, he's still got this core base of 30 to 35% of the Republican electorate, in some cases, possibly more. He is a very shrewd and adept campaigner. He knows how to insult and to take down his political adversaries. So it is far too early to count him out of the Republican race for the nomination, particularly if, as it appears, there will be multiple candidates running. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, clearly looms as the most formidable opponent to Trump right now. He's a Trumpist without being Trump, or an advocate of Trumpism, I suppose. But it also appears we're going to have other candidates. Mike Pence appears to be getting ready to run. Mike Pompeo, the former CIA director and Secretary of State, appears getting ready to run. Then you have moderate Republicans. Chris Christie seems to be making noises about running, as does Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia. So the more candidates get in, the easier it would be for Trump with that core 30%, almost cult-like base of his to prevail in a divided field, which is how he got elected in the first place.
That's an obvious thought. That's one I hadn't thought of at all, actually. That's the more candidates there are, the easier it is for him. I started off talking about his possible legal travails, and later on we can see whether that's a help or a hindrance. I mean, we would think immediately, that is going to be problematic for them. But let's just start off to name what those possible indictments, those possible cases are. We know about the papers in Mar-a-Lago. I think everyone's going to be aware of that. And obviously the January the 6th investigations. Maybe just start off with those two, but there's more beyond that too as well. Yeah,
okay. So the big the big three that I think Trump's ample legal team would be most focused on is certainly the Justice Department investigations. And Merrick Garland, just a couple of weeks ago, Garland is the Attorney General, named a special counsel, a career prosecutor named Jack Smith, to head up the investigations into the Mar-a-Lago classified documents matter and the investigation into January 6th as it pertains to Trump and his allies. And so that is that. Look, the history of special counsels is pretty clear in almost every case, not entirely, but in almost every case, whether it be an independent counsel, which is what we used to call them under a previous law, the independent counsel law, or special counsels, which are under Justice Department regulations. In almost every case, they bring criminal charges, not necessarily always against the targets. Robert Mueller felt constrained when he was the special counsel investigating the Trump-Russia matter, concluded that under Justice Department policy, he could not indict Donald Trump, but he indicted others. Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, Paul Manafort, the former campaign manager, and several others, as well as multiple Russians, were all indicted. So that's last.
Really interesting. That's a really interesting comparison. I mean, obviously that reflected a lot on Mueller's character, who's quite conservative. But the charges in this case here are probably more serious, aren't they?
Well, potentially, sure. And, there's one big difference. Donald Trump is no longer president. He's the former president. And what prevented Robert Mueller from bringing criminal charges against Donald Trump is Justice Department policy that says you can't indict a sitting president. Donald Trump is not a sitting president. So he's in the same category as everybody else under the law and can. I think right now one would have to say more likely than not will be indicted. Whether it's in both of these cases remains to be seen, both of the cases being Mar-a-Lago plus January 6th. I think most legal observers think that the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case is the cleaner, easier case to make because there's ample precedent for prosecuting individuals who hold on to classified documents that don't belong to them. And that's exactly what Donald Trump did. In addition to these two Justice Department investigations, and we can go into more detail in a moment about the pros and cons in each one, or the strengths or weaknesses of each one. There's also the Fulton County District Attorney investigation being conducted by Fani Willis in Atlanta, Georgia. That is a very serious matter. There you have Trump's own voice on tape calling up the Secretary of State of Georgia in January of 2021, urging him to find just enough votes to flip the electoral votes in the state from Biden to Trump. In fact, famous Trump famously said, all we need is 11,780 votes, just one more than we need. So he was telling Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, to find just one more vote than was needed to flip the results of
staying with that particular
Georgia
case. So you've got a county which, in terms of that's a fairly low level court, if you like, but a DA who's brave enough perhaps to take on that course, or should be taking on that case. How is she going to pursue it? What's the possible way that they'll
she's well into it at this point. In fact, she's probably further along than folks at the Justice Department investigating Trump for January 6th, because she's been at it now for well over a year. She has gotten a special grand jury that has been holding hearings with witnesses for the past 4 or 5 months now. They've
she's
called
some
quite
major
a few
people up as well, hasn't she?
Yes. We had just Senator Lindsey Graham testified just the other day, just before Thanksgiving. He had fought having to testify. The court said, no, you have to. So I think the expectation, Fani Lewis is a no-nonsense prosecutor. African-American woman, was elected in 2020, actually, surprisingly, on a pretty strong anti-crime platform of, she is no she's no progressive woke prosecutor. She's a classic DA. If you do the time, if you do the crime, you do the time. And she's been very aggressive, indicting gang leaders, including rappers in Georgia. So she's shown that she will have no hesitation to bring criminal charges when she believes she's got a case, and all indications are she believes she has a case. So the expectation right now is, there's a bit of a guessing game which indictment for Trump would come first. Would it be Fulton County or the Mar-a-Lago one? And I think it could be they could be coming at approximately the same time in early next year.
Well, That's fascinating. Staying with the Fulton County one, the way she's pursuing that case is similar to pursuing an organized crime case, isn't it?
Well, she is a fan of Georgia's RICO law. RICO is racketeering, influence, conspiracy organizations, it's patterned after the federal RICO law, which was really crafted and enacted in 1970 during Richard Nixon's presidency, mainly as a tool to go after mobs, La Cosa Nostra, the mafia. Or big drug cartels. But in Fulton County, with Georgia, they have made use of, Fani Willis herself has made use of Georgia's version of RICO, which actually in some ways is more expansive and a stronger tool for prosecutors than the federal one. She's used it in a famous school cheating case against Atlanta school teachers and administrators for cheating on school kids' test scores. She's used it. She used it just last year in the indictment of rap singers and gang members that I mentioned before. And all indications are she's planning on using it again in her charges against Donald Trump and his allies.
Michael, what's the timescale here? I mean, if you're looking at the sort of political calendar, 2023 and 2024 is by the beginning of 2024, you're running. You're going to be doing campaigning in 2023 in places ahead of the New Hampshire primaries. You're thinking about Iowa. So potential presidential candidates are going to be going through this area. They want to be campaigning a lot. And then by 2024, you've got to be on the campaign trail full time. So how does that work with those potential, if you've got indictments in the new year, how does the legal process work in tandem?
We're in uncharted waters here. There's never been a criminal prosecution of a former president. So right off the bat, this is something we've never seen before. The expectation is there will be multiple appeals across the board, pre-trial, once the indictment comes down. If in the Fulton County, all expectations are that Trump's lawyers will try to move it to federal court, saying that a state court can't resolve charges against somebody who was president at the time. There will be arguments he was doing presidential duties or acting as a president, and so therefore a state court cannot hear and resolve the charges, assuming Fani Willis brings them. So there's that, and these are appeals that could take some time. Could well go all the way up to the Supreme Court. Whether the Supreme Court thinks they have any merit and actually hears the case, we don't know. The Supreme Court just turned down a couple of Trump appeals in the last few weeks. So sometimes they'll just dismiss Trump's legal filings out of hand. But when it comes to a trial, I think there's an expectation that there will be many creative appeals we haven't seen before. Certainly, in the Mar-a-Lago case, all indications are Trump is going to make claims that he'd already declassified these records or was using them, was not using them for any improper or illegitimate purpose. So there will be a lot of legal filings, a lot of appeals that could slow down the legal process. But will it slow it down till after the 2024 election? Probably not. Judges are aware of the calendars just as journalists are, and just as jurors are. So, we don't know. And I think anybody who tells you they know how this is going to play out is fooling you, because we just don't know. But I think that the expectations if I'm right that, and we do see indictments in the first quarter of 2023, then I think you get to a trial on one or both of them by within a year. So that does put you into the 2024 calendar. Now, it may well be that Trump thinks this redounds to his political benefit, especially in a Republican primary where there could be lots of suspicions about the FBI and the Democratic Justice Department, the Biden administration Justice Department, and claims that they're being political. Fani Willis is an elected Democrat, so there will certainly be claims that her case is political as well. It may be that this helps Trump in a Republican primary. And become the Republican nominee, even if he's facing indictments. And then you get to the question of, first of all, who the hell knows what the presidential race in 2024 is going to look like? Right now, it appears Joe Biden is going to run for re-election. The Democrats did much better than anybody expected, and that's boosted Biden's prospects for a re-election. If he chooses to run, he said he will make that decision in the next few months as well. So will he be a strong enough campaign? Right now, he just turned 80 years old. His approval ratings are still in the 40s. Less than half the country thinks he's doing a good job of president. So what happens if there is another Biden-Trump race? Who the hell knows? I would have to give the advantage to Biden. He beat him before, and Trump presumably will be have these criminal cases hanging over him. On the other hand, it's not inconceivable that we could have Donald Trump get convicted of federal and state crimes and then become president of the United States.
That was fantastic. The New York Times has got this
right.
app.
In which case he pardons himself, of course. Yeah. But he can pardon himself in the Fulton County case, right?
Federal law doesn't work there. Yeah,
federal law does not work there, and I don't believe that the governor has pardon power in Georgia. So Brian Kemp can't save Trump's ass in that one. I think the pardon decisions are up to a pardon and parole board in Georgia, I believe. So,
and can
we'll see.
On the New York Times app, you have this various off-ramps for Trump, which is, jury fails to convict because, the odds are that you might have one, if you don't get a conviction because one member of the jury is not ready to convict, you don't have a conclusion. Do you have a retrial? It's a mess. Right. You're not going to go to a retrial. And you go through all these different possible off-ramps. And so it seems like he's got many, many ways of getting out. But the last ones you get to is sentenced to jail, pardons himself.
Yeah. Well, that's in the federal case, but not in the state. You can't do that in Fulton County. But look, he's got to get convicted. As I pointed out before, if the Justice Department brings the criminal charges against Trump in the District of Columbia, it will have the most anti-Trump jury pool you could get anywhere in the United States. District of Columbia is a jurisdiction that voted well over 90% against Trump in 2020 election for Joe Biden. So I think, and by the way, there is a real question in the Mar-a-Lago case. Where do you bring the criminal indictment of Trump? Would it be in Mar-a-Lago, where the classified documents were being improperly held, or in the District of Columbia, where they were taken from the White House to Florida? Now, if you bring the case in Florida, you've got a much more favorable jury pool for Donald Trump than you would have in the District of Columbia. If they bring the case in District of Columbia, you have the much better jury pool, but then you do face the political charges that you're doing it there for political reasons because of anti-Trump jury pool. So that's that's going to be a very tricky decision that the special counsel Jack Smith is going to have to make. Contemplates how he's going to charge.
Listen, we've got you for another sort of half hour or just under, and I'd love people to start putting questions so we can talk about a whole range of things in US politics. And so people,
we should mention just a couple of other, there's also a civil case that's been brought against the Trump Organization by the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. So that's another case, but it's a civil case that she's brought against the Trump Organization, and that accuses Trump of all sorts of, fraudulent actions. And then you have the New York District Attorney, who is still reportedly still investigating Trump for fraudulent business practices. I think that's not considered very likely at this point. They had hoped, the New York DA's office had hoped that Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer, would flip on Trump. He has not done so. He's on trial right now, and the Trump Organization is on trial right now for fraudulent tax practices, but no indication that that is leading to building any further evidence that can be used against Trump.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking through it. I'm trying to think of previous examples, but it would seem to me quite a possibility that Trump could either perjure himself or be done for obstruction of justice, just as much as he could be pursued for the actual indictments that they're considering.
Well, in Mar-a-Lago, it is considered among other things, an obstruction of justice case because he got a subpoena to return all the classified documents he had in his possession. He gave, 11, 12 boxes. And then the FBI and the Justice Department picked up information that he still had documents there that he did not turn over in response to the subpoena. So that's when they conducted the search in August. They got a judge's approval for a search warrant to search the premises, and they found multiple more boxes filled with classified material in them.
Michael, what sense do you get from the Republican Party leadership? There must be nervousness after the midterm elections now. But
yeah, certainly.
This guy is he's still dominant. I mean, he's still
well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think that if it was a pure poll of Republican office holders and voters right now, a majority would not say they want Donald Trump running for president again. Even those who were, strong supporters of him until now. I think that the realization that he really did hurt the party in these midterms is clear. This recent controversy about meeting Kanye West and a white supremacist Kanye West brought along, Nicholas Fuentes, has left a really sour taste in a lot of among a lot of Republicans. They didn't like that.
To Israel. A Trump appointee coming out and
and more. You had Asa Hutchinson, the governor of Arkansas, being quite strong, denouncing Trump for taking this meeting. There's a lot of disgruntlement about Trump and his erratic conduct inflammatory statements that he continues to make on Truth Social, his social media site. But you've got that hardcore base, and they're all afraid of that because it's essential to the Republican coalition at this point. The Republicans can't win if they completely alienate the Trump base. They need to keep that Trump base while distancing themselves from Trump, and that's proving to be a very difficult needle to thread.
Yeah, absolutely. Philip Godfrey, let's start with some questions. Go ahead, Philip.
Can you hear me, Nicholas?
Yes, yeah.
I'm quite interested, and forgive me, I came late to this conversation, so if you've covered this, apologies in advance, but Trump's tax status, I believe that the Supreme Court has recently voted to insist that he does reveal his tax situation, and unless I've got that wrong, my two questions are, one, how threatening is that, or have people discounted it and aren't bothered? But two, is it interesting if it is the case that the Supreme Court, who he has populated with his own people, are proving themselves to be pretty independent, because it's quite an embarrassing time for this to be revealed. I'm just interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, it's not the first time that the Supreme Court has failed to do what Donald Trump wanted them to do, even after having three Trump appointees on the court. So that people should take some comfort from that, the fact that, we still do have an independent judiciary. The tax matter, I'm not all that excited about it. What the Supreme Court did is they declined to hear an appeal that Trump's lawyers had made of a lower court decision, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, saying that Congress had a right to review Trump's taxes. That doesn't necessarily make them public. In fact, the law that the Congress gets them specifically says they can't make them public. They can make perhaps summaries or information derived from them public. But remember, this is a case brought by the Democratic House of Representatives. Come January 3rd, that becomes a Republican-controlled House of Representatives. So if they only have a few weeks to do what they want with them, and I'm not look, I mean, the New York Times had the taxes, 2 or 3 years ago, wrote, endless stories about them. I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff there, but nothing that leapt out at me as obviously criminal or obviously evidence of foreign stakeholding in Trump's organization. So I think this is one of those issues that got people a lot worked up, that may not really factor into, or certainly doesn't factor into the issues he's being investigated for that are a major criminal threat to him right now.
Okay. In a way, I suppose for us journalists, this becomes exciting stuff, the nitty gritty, what's the latest twist and turn. But I'm just thinking next year when the Republicans have Congress and they're going to be launching their own investigations into Biden's son, doesn't this all just become more noise? You've got trials here, investigations there, and the ordinary electorate is, well, look, this is just part of politics. Does it cut through? That's the question.
We'll see. I was struck by how in Washington, we were all obsessed with the January 6th committee hearings. And, at times blown away by some of the testimony that came out in those hearings. And then you looked at the polls and you listened to what voters had to say, and it had very little impact on voters who went to the polls earlier this month. Now, we're a pretty divided country and the number of true independents is much smaller than, I think we would all like it to be. So we have two warring partisan factions with a relatively small group of voters in the middle. I think, it may be that these things, gradually have an impact among independents, and that it could be enough to make a difference. But we will see. The Republicans, look, we're in really interesting times right now. I mean, in many ways, unprecedented times in Washington. Certainly the whole business with Trump. Trump is an unprecedented character we've never seen before in American, history on this stage as a U.S. president. And criminally prosecuting him is unprecedented as well. But we've had a Republican majority, very slim majority, that's about to take office on January 3rd. Not entirely clear Kevin McCarthy, the leader of the Republican Party, has enough votes to become Speaker of the House. If he does not, God knows what chaos could reign in the House of Representatives. But even if he does, those investigations we'll see. Republicans do have a habit of overdoing it when they conduct investigations. And, we all remember Benghazi and, all the talk about Benghazi for years. And then when it came to it, they really didn't have much to show for their investigation into that. And, Hillary Clinton was home before the Benghazi committee for, 8 hours or something. And most people, even people like myself, who are not especially sympathetic towards her, thought that she deserved some sympathy for the beating she was taking from Republican members who really didn't have that much to attack her for.
Yeah. I think really one got the impression, as I was saying earlier, in Georgia, that people were tired of Trump. But in Florida, there was a different guy, and it's
Right.
DeSantis. And the excitement that he creates among Republicans is great. And you could possibly see him surpassing Trump. But he's got his own issues. He hasn't really been tested on a national scale. He's quite thin-skinned. Did you, by the way, see that the video he released, his wife released, about on the 8th day, God.
I thought that was one of the most absurd campaign ads, if not the most absurd campaign ads I'd ever see. I mean, basically, it was, God created Ron DeSantis, to fight for you. I mean, it was so over the top. But look, the guy won in a landslide. Got 59% of the vote. I mean, won by over 1 million votes. That's a pretty significant achievement in a major state like Florida. But that said, as you point out, he hasn't been tested on a national scale. It's not clear he has the kind of charismatic personality that is going to really energize voters in the way Trump did. So, I don't know.
But in a slicker campaign, in a tightly controlled campaign, it might work on a national scale, but he's got to fight off a lot of other people in the meantime, particularly, as you say, during those primaries.
Right.
Yes. Okay. Wait, let's broaden the questions out. We've got a question from Hillary, and this is from a concerned potential Democrat. Go ahead, Hillary.
I have many friends in America, as I lived there for a long time, by the way, in Alaska, and I was glad to see that Sarah Palin, the Trump candidate, lost. She didn't win in Alaska, but I can't get any of them to tell me who would replace Biden if he doesn't run. There's nobody out there. Pete Buttigieg is the only name I've heard, and he's gay, and I don't think America's ready for a gay president. And I just wonder if Joe Biden, he says he'll run again because he doesn't want to be seen as a lame duck president. But if there was a Democratic candidate who appeared on the horizon who was younger, with charismatic voter recognition, maybe he'd reconsider. But who is there in the Democrat? I haven't heard any names really.
Well,
Michael, can I just chip into
Sure.
before we answer Hillary's question, which is a really good one? Is it possible for someone to challenge Biden at the primaries and say, "Look, hang on a second, old man, there are better people here"?
Yes, of course. It is possible. That's the whole point of a primary. Anybody can run if they get the requisite signatures to be on the ballot. But one of the reasons you haven't heard as much talk about that as you might have expected is, until November 8th, there was a lot of unease among Democrats on this very issue and an expectation that if the Republicans did as expected and there was a red wave, that there would be a lot of internal angst among Democrats on this very issue right after the election. But as I said before, the Democrats did better than expected. And so that has tamped down, at least for now, the concern about Biden's age and him running for re-election. But that said, are there potential candidates out there? Sure. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has been doing all sorts of things on a national stage that seem to be preparing, getting ready to lay the groundwork for a potential presidential campaign. Obviously, Kamala Harris, as Biden's vice president, would be, immediately in the mix. Although I have to say, when you talk to Democrats, privately off the record, nobody is particularly impressed with her performance as vice president and feel she has, it's been one blunder after another without really cutting herself a strong image or carving out an issue that she could claim her own. She was supposed to do the border, but that hasn't fared well for the Biden administration at all. So you would have to consider her, but there are others. Governor Whitmer in Michigan has been talked about. She had a very strong performance in the midterms, won re-election. Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut, you hear some talk about him. He's a young, energetic, very polished senator from Connecticut on the Foreign Affairs Committee. So he's got more of a presence on, at least on foreign policy issues, than, say, a Governor DeSantis in Florida, or a Governor Newsom or Governor Whitmer as potential. And as Nick mentioned, Pete Buttigieg, of course, as well. So, And don't forget, there will inevitably, if the field does open up and Biden doesn't run for re-election, of course there will be another progressive candidate, whether Bernie Sanders runs again or Elizabeth Warren or some other young progressive to carry that mantle. It's a Democratic primary, and there would almost certainly be at least one, if not more, progressive contenders.
Michael, it seemed, looking from afar, it does seem ridiculous that such a person who evidently is not completely in control of things, in his memory, his potential to make gaffes, which have always been there, seem to have become more and more frequent. What do you have contact with people in the White House? What do they say? What do the people around him actually say?
The people around him are the loyalists, right?
Yeah.
So they spin and insist that all's fine, and Biden is Biden. He's always been a bit of a loose cannon. That's a part of his charm, in a way, right? You never know what he's going to say next. But they will point to his record of accomplishments and look at all we got past, and particularly when Manchin came through there in the end, and they could pass what they sort of, rather inaccurately called the Inflation Reduction Act.
It just seems to me it's like a sort of an existential crisis for the Democrats, a lack of purpose. You've got sort of anger on the Republican side, and that sort of has previously served them well. And then this is a very superficial take, of course, but what are the Democrats about? Why, where's the drive? Why haven't they got this sense of where they're going? That seems.
And you've got this a party that is split between its moderate, the middle, the moderates who probably are a majority of the Democratic Party, but you have the much more militant, vocal, progressive base that is, that is a major factor. And then you have interest groups that are tied with the progressive base, the civil rights groups, the Latino groups. You've got the labor unions. I mean, there are the Democratic Party is a collection of interests, really, and balancing those interests is what I think Ron Klain, the White House Chief of Staff, spends most of his time doing, working for Joe Biden.
So in a way, you're basically saying the Republicans have got a more refined agenda. You can identify.
I don't know about refined. Is not a word I would use to describe the
gun
Republican
rights,
Party
abortion.
Right.
You could name a couple of hit points.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Hillary's follow-up is, do you think that the January 6th hearings will be terminated as a result of the Republicans taking
Well, they definitely will be terminated. They go out of business on January 3rd. We're all now eagerly waiting to see their final report, which should be coming out, within a month or so. And also they have promised to release all their evidence, including the transcripts of all their depositions. They did hundreds of depositions. We're looking at, tens of thousands of pages of documents that, if I'm hearing what they're saying correctly, are all going to be released within the next month. That is going to be quite a feeding frenzy for folks like me to be poring over, because, January 6th committee has gotten a lot of praise for putting on these hearings that had all sorts of really explosive stuff. On the other hand, there are some, legitimate criticisms, one of which is one I have expressed, which is they have not released their evidence. They haven't released their depositions. What we've seen in these very polished TV hearings are little snippets where, you get a sentence from Jared Kushner. Well, what else did he have to say? What did he say before that? What did he say after that? Let's see all these depositions that they've done, and I want to read them. I want to review them. I want to see what the committee left out in its presentation. Was it evidence that undercut some of what they had to say? Was it evidence that, we all, that is going to lead to new stories? I don't know, but I won't know until I actually read the material, and that's something I want to do.
Okay. I want to switch briefly to sort of foreign affairs to a degree. Your book, Russian Roulette, was about Russian interference in the 2016 election. Obviously, the Republicans are now going to try and focus on Biden over Ukraine. Where do you see? There are two questions. A, I want to know: are the Russians? Do you see the Chinese trying to interfere in any way within social media, within the electoral process, or is that something that's been and gone? They've had their moment.
Look, what the Russians did in 2016. They created a playbook that others used. The Iranians in 2020, were accused of interfering in our election and set up social media websites with kill lists of election officials, threatening their lives, all for the purpose, making it seem like it was coming from the MAGA crowd, when actually it was just the Iranians trying to do what the Russians did in 2016, which is stir the pot stoke our divisions. The Chinese have done similar things. So this is a constant now, I think, to have interference. What the Russians did, though, was unprecedented at the time and unquestionably consequential, with the hacking the DNC emails and the Podesta emails, getting them to WikiLeaks, having WikiLeaks dump them into the public sphere, all for the purpose of stirring folks up and also damaging Hillary Clinton's candidacy. It worked in real ways. I'm not one of those who say the Russians therefore were responsible for Donald Trump's election. It's impossible to make that kind of conclusion, but there's no question that they had an impact, and what they did was consequential.
Okay. Please do. We've got a few more minutes left. Do get it's your last chance to get questions in, please. So, and there's some great names here listening in, and I know that they're very capable of asking very good questions. That's a subtle hint there. Please do put your questions in the Q&A box, or just raise your hand, and then we can put that question to Michael. I'm very interested in, this is not so much about domestic politics. If with a Republican-controlled House, how does policy with Ukraine, how affected is that? How do you see that?
Really good question. McCarthy did give an interview before the election that said that a Republican-controlled House was not going to give a blank check to the Ukrainians for whatever arms they wanted. That was widely criticized by Democrats at the time. And then right after that, the House Progressive Caucus released a letter saying that it was time for diplomacy in Ukraine. That blew up in their face, especially after so many Democrats had been criticizing McCarthy. But all that said, I think that a lot's gonna depend on what's going on in the war. I mean, for all the horror people legitimately have for what the Russians are doing, on the other hand, is there a strategy that that the West, that NATO, the United States, has for dislodging the Russians from the territories they currently control? I mean, the Ukrainians have made some gains, no question about it. They got back control of Kherson. That was a huge victory for them.
That seems, and that the reading of that is that that's really on the back of really American weapons or Western weapons.
Right, exactly. But they've got a long way to go. And I don't see a strategic endgame here for the war. And if that's the case, and this looks in 6 months like a bloody ongoing stalemate, I think you're going to see a lot more questions about just how far our aid to the Ukrainians should go. Yeah. Nobody wants to reward Vladimir Putin for his naked aggression, but on the other hand, we're not fighting Putin. We're not putting American troops on the ground. The Brits aren't putting British troops on the ground. So that said, are we going to continue to foot the bill indefinitely for a war that has no end in sight? I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, that's a tough one. At the moment, you've got people like Marjorie Taylor Greene asking the question and suggesting there's corruption at the heart of all these transactions, all the aid going to Ukraine, there's criminality behind it, or words to that effect. Obviously sees on the margins, but you can see that other Republicans might take that up as time goes by.
Sure.
I want to play this to you. I'm going to inflict this upon you. I think it's a little treat. And if you've got more questions, please do put them in the Q&A box. But I think we do have to see Ron DeSantis's little video, and I'm going to play at least the first few minutes of it. So here we go.
And on the 8th day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a protector. So God made a fighter. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, kiss his family goodbye, travel thousands of miles for no other reason than to serve the people, to save their jobs, their livelihoods, their liberty, their happiness. So God made a fighter. God said, I need someone to be strong, advocate truth in the midst of hysteria, someone who challenges conventional wisdom and isn't afraid to defend what he knows to be right and just. So God made a fighter. God said, I need somebody who will take the arrows, stand firm in the wake of unrelenting attacks, look a mother in the eyes and tell her that her child will be in school. She can keep her job, go to church, eat dinner with friends, and hold the hand of an aging parent.
I'm going to stop it there. We were speaking. It's quite incredible. We were speaking to a Republican media house in Florida, and he's got so much money. He doesn't play 30-minute ads. He wasn't playing 30-second ads in his TV ads and doing the campaign running up to the midterms. Yeah. They play 1 minute, 2-minute ads. I mean, they've got that much money; they can buy that much airtime. I'm not too sure if that was released on Twitter by his wife.
Yeah, pretty amazing. I wonder if there's another country in the world where somebody could get away with an ad like that in a political campaign. Yeah. I don't know.
Listen, Michael, thank you very much for your time. It's been really, really enjoyable.
Sure.
We've got we're here in Johannesburg. We're in the middle of our South Africa tour, which has been very enjoyable. And we are going to release our talks for the rest of this month very shortly. But thank you very much indeed for your time. It's been a really enjoyable 50 minutes or so. Thank you very much.
Sure enough. Anytime.